let's see what the modern culture says, right? So is it sex? If you watch any movie or any TV show, if you do any Netflix or anything like that, you'd think that your sex life is the most important thing. That's where most relationships start out and then they flame out pretty quickly. Is it having the same goals together as a couple? And they go through all these different reasons, and then it says, good old-fashioned compassion is what a marriage needs the most. That's our gospel-ignorant, off-the-chain culture saying to us, if you live the one another's, you see what I did there? Captain Segway. If you live the one another's, even people who aren't Christians often have good marriages because they approximate what Christ teaches us. They're people who are very forgiving, they're caring, they're committed, all those things. I'm interested, when you left here last week, after looking at this list, loving one another, being devoted, honoring one another, building up one another, accepting one another, care for, serve, bear one another's burdens, forgive, etc. When you go through that, did any of you have any aha moments this week that you would share with the group? Anything that you learned? And I'm thinking particularly two questions I asked myself. One is, which of these are fairly easy for me? And which of these are just really, really hard? We're doing this, Glenn's leading our elders and deacons in this DISC test, showing us how our personalities on our leadership team and servant team, how all that is working. And it's just fascinating to see on paper, on a graph, your personality. You know, now it's not an x-ray of your soul, but it's a good big picture of how we are and how we're all so different. Then I took that and applied that to this list. Which of these, because of how I'm hardwired, how God created me, which of these are easy for me and which are hard? Any thoughts on that? Ones that you would say, you know, for me, my personality, my upbringing, just who I am, this one's fairly easy for me. Anybody? And spouse, you can't contradict if they raise their hand. Okay. Anybody? I'm sorry? Patient? To be patient. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, some people are just kind of naturally that way. And what else? Any of these that really stuck out is, I get a check mark on this one. Anybody?
Encourage.
I'm sorry? Encourage. Yeah, encourage. You find that easy. Yeah.
I make it hard.
I'm sorry?
I make it to be hard.
Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, okay. Being patient is hard. Yes. What about hard or easy? Hard. Which of these are hard for you?
Being patient.
Being patient. She says being patient.
My spouse isn't in here. I can talk freely.
Yes, but we are recording this, so.
I think it's easier for me to bear burdens. I think I'm pretty attuned because of what I do. And so this week, because you said an example this week, would have been Demetrius's mom's birthday. Those of you that know us know his mom passed away. So kind of forward thinking about where areas could be difficult or reminders or things like that.
Yeah. And so you said essentially because of what I do in my life, I'm oriented that way. And it's quite possible that you do what you do in your life because you're oriented that way. Does that make sense? That we gravitate toward the things that we're really, really good at. Don?
You know, I look at this comfort and encourage are right there next to each other out of 1 Thessalonians. And I feel so often I miss the opportunity to comfort, because I want to come up with solutions and I want to be the encourager.
Yeah.
And, the timing of those are critically, they go in the right order. Even there, you've got comfort prior in Thessalonians 4, prior to 1 Thessalonians 4.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's real easy. I love to encourage, but to comfort, I can tell Robin sometimes is disappointed when she comes to me with something. Whereas when I'm going through a difficult time at work, she is always very good at comforting.
Yeah. If you want to see a really artificial, awkward feeling way of comforting one another, watch British TV. It's so funny. They're there. It's stiff upper lip. It's all going to be fine.
A cup of tea.
Yeah, what's that?
A cup of tea.
Yeah, let's have a cuppa, and it'll all be better. Okay, so I really encourage you. You know, the reason I gave this to you, obviously, is that we tend to so focus on Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3 and so forth, these passages that talk about headship and submission and so forth, and we get wrapped around the axle of that wheel all the time, and we can't seem to find any conclusion to it, and it's just a place where we can't seem to find how that works. Well, it works because, number one, we understand that marriage, it may be for us, but it's not about us. It's about Christ. And that those passages all are preceded by, for example, in Ephesians 5, it's preceded by, be filled with the Spirit, which is the context in which I can love my wife as Christ loved the church, and my wife can work through that issue of following me and submitting to my leadership. In 1 Peter 3, we just had 1 Peter 2, where it talks about the sacrifice of Jesus and the willingness to sacrifice and to love and to serve and so forth. Then he talks about husbands and wives. So this precedes everything that we know about relationships. And this precedes everything, therefore, we know. David, as you were talking about, the servant and the master, all of that. You know, we're so hooked up and wound up about the issue of slavery and so forth. Well, of course, the apostles and Jesus could have come out and said, slavery is evil. They could have done that. And we would never be any better for it. Because what they were about is the evil of the heart, and they wanted to transform us on the inside. And that's how these social issues get resolved. So, take the time. I'll tell you, it's a great exercise to just, over the next 3 months or so, sit down with your spouse. Guys, take the lead. That's awkward for us. Listen, I live with a woman who's way more spiritual than me. She's way smarter than me, and she's way stronger than me. And I'm the pastor, and I'm supposed to be able to lead her spiritually. It's awkward for us, but take the lead and just say, before we go to bed tonight, I'm just going to read John 13:34. And then the next night, wife, pick up the Bible and say, I'm going to read Romans 12:10 for us. Let's let the last thing we hear, the last thing we see before we go to bed, before our brain cells do that thing all night, let's let the words of God permeate what we're going to be thinking about, what we're going to be praying in our spirit about, what hopefully we're going to start dreaming about. And just fill our minds, turn off the phone, put the news, guys, it's an election year, turn it off. There was never any truth on it, and now there's really not any truth on it. It's just turn it off. It's not healthy for us. Okay, with that, turn that sheet over. And I recommended a book to you by Paul David Tripp. He's a good writer in all kinds of ways and has had an incredible, painful journey, his own life. And so he writes about those things, and he's a great counselor to walk us through some of these things. And the title of the book is simply Marriage, subtitle, 6 Gospel Commitments That Every Couple Needs to Make. Okay? And then the introduction, before he gets to the 6 commitments. And by the way, let's go back and remind ourselves that whether it's how we lead at work, how we follow at work, how we parent our children, how our children follow us, how I'm a good husband or a good wife, how I'm a good neighbor, pick any human relationship that you're involved in. And at the core of that relationship should be the gospel, the work of the gospel in my life. And not just the work of the gospel in my life, but the expression of the gospel. And so when I'm, for example, disciplining my children, somehow in that there has to be a gospel message to my child. There has to be not only the discipline for the infraction, but the embracing, the asking for forgiveness and the free giving of forgiveness, and so forth and so on. We had a situation I'll tell you about real quick. Our oldest son, James, was probably 14 years old. He had a friend, Jeremy, who was in Boy Scouts. And Jeremy invited James to go to the big thing they have at the Naval Air Station every year where the kids go in and climb on the airplanes and they camp out and all that. And so James was all excited about this. And it was Saturday morning, and James and Ben, who's 5 years younger, they're in some kind of fight thing going on. And so I stepped in and I said, "That's it. Go to your rooms. You're done. You're done for the day." And James said, "But Dad, I'm supposed to go with Jeremy." And I said, swallowing hard because I don't like doing this. This is not my personality. I said, "You know, we make difficult choices in life and the consequences are often very painful." So he goes and gets in the shower, I'm sure fuming, heating the water, with his anger. So little Ben, 9 years old, comes up to me and he says, "Dad, I feel really bad for James because I was the one who started the fight. Is there anything I can do so he can go with Jeremy?" So I stood there, I said, "Well, if you're willing to take his punishment, I'll let him go." And he said, "What's the punishment?" I said, 3 swats. We use a little rod that easily breaks, so you don't ever break skin or bones or anything, but it stings. I said, "If you'll take his spanking, I'll let him go." So that little 9-year-old boy put his hands on the bed. I always make them put their hands on the bed so we don't have these cracked fingers thing. And I swatted him, swallowing hard and tearing up as I did it. I swatted him. And there was a part of me that wanted to let him off the hook. There was a part of me that wanted to just tap him. But I gave it to him the way I would have given it to James. And he turned and he hugged me, and I thanked him for what he did. And right about that time, because we were in our master bedroom, and James came out of the shower, and he was drying off, and I said, "James, you're free to go. You can go. You can go with Jeremy." And he's like, "Why?" I said, "Because your brother took your punishment." The gospel has to be in everything, right? And that little boy, what he learned about the sacrifice of Jesus, and James, who stood there with his mouth, and you guys have met James, you've seen the work of God in his life, and that little boy has a part in that work of God in his life. You see, all these things are designed to undo our impulse in the moment. So we said that the principle is that God will use your spouse more powerfully, more deeply, more regularly, and more completely than any other thing or person in your life to confront the things that are not like Christ and to conform you to the likeness of Christ. So this is about way more than me getting what I want in a relationship. This is about God's sanctifying work in us. And if you go into marriage with that in mind, if you understand that, then over time you can learn to delight in the fact that your wife or your husband is confronting you, or to delight in the fact that there's something different about them, because what you want more than anything is for Christ's likeness to grow in your life. And your wife, your husband, is the person that's doing that in you. That's a very hard concept to grasp. And man, when you're in the battle, it's really hard to grasp. So let's remember that, one, you're conducting your marriage in a fallen world, and you are a sinner married to sinners. Carrie, you said last week, two people, say that again out loud.
I think it's two people becoming one flesh. You have half the space and twice the sin.
Yeah, take two sinners, become one flesh in half the space with twice the sin. Have a nice marriage. We're married to sinners. Allison she posts these things around our house, mostly on the refrigerator. Stop judging others for sinning differently than you do. Wait, she posted that on, never mind. God is faithful in all of this. He's powerful. He's willing. I thought of that verse that says, God is at work in you both to will and to do his good pleasure. How many times do I just don't want to do it. So sometimes, a lot of times, my prayer is, Lord, would you make me want to do this? I don't want to do this. Would you make me want to do it? Godly marriage flows out of our daily worship of God as creator, and Tripp picks these two descriptors of God specifically. Creator, because he's talking about God as the creator of marriage, and sovereign because, just go listen to David's sermon today. That it is about authority, that God is at the center of all things. He has the right to command me to do things a certain way. And then a godly marriage is not a mystery. And what I mean by that is, of course, there's mysterious things about marriage, and that's part of what makes marriage really fun and enjoyable if you can embrace the fact. For example, one of the things that's terrible about our culture and the way people, particularly women, dress is that it takes all the mystery out of it. There's something about even how we dress. There's something about the way we carry ourselves that, they talk about the mysterious man, and they talk about the mystery of the beauty of a woman. So there is some mystery in marriage, but the Scriptures, what we're supposed to do in marriage, the Scripture's pretty clear about this. Now, there's no chapter and verse about what do I do at 3 in the morning when it doesn't say that, but it tells us, it gives us a framework for making these decisions. And as we follow Jesus, as we incorporate the life of Christ into our lives, as we frame everything in our life, our marriage, our family, around this Christ likeness, then we'll have wisdom, and we'll get it wrong sometimes. We just get it wrong. Someone asked me on this whole submission thing, so how many times in your marriage, because we'll be married 50 years, I'm sorry, sweetheart. 50 years, 50 wonderful years. How many times in your marriage have you just put your foot down and just said, God made me the man, he made me the head, this is how we're going to do it? And my answer is, I remember about 4 or 5 times I did that. And at least 3 of those times, I was totally wrong. And I had to go back and apologize. Which gives you a sense of the struggle. If my wife doesn't have a real walk with Christ, if she doesn't have a trust in God that he can, hit my bonehead every once in a while and bring me around, then that's just fodder. That's just cannon fodder for fighting all the time. So the more we follow Christ, the more we live out the character of Christ, the less mystery there will be in how we're supposed to act in a marriage relationship. So, all right, 6 commitments. Let's do this really quick. First of all, we will give ourselves to a regular lifestyle of confession and forgiveness. And I wrote in the margin next to this, before God, 1 John chapter 1, and before each other, James chapter 5. So a regular life of confession and forgiveness is one of the hardest things that we do, because confessing and admitting that we're wrong is one of the most incredibly difficult things. And to forgive each other, and truly forgive each other. To forgive it in a way to forgive means I will never hold this debt against you ever again. It's wiped out. It's a commercial term. It's an accounting term. I wipe out the debt. It's not there anymore. I won't bring it up. We carry these gunny sacks around on our back with all the things that our spouses did that hurt us, that wounded us, that were wrong, that were painful. And that becomes this great toolbox for pulling out anytime we need to remind our spouse of something that they did, 43 years ago. What about confession and forgiveness? There's an amazing thing that happens, and this is why, guys, when we discipline our children, to give them the opportunity to say what they did was wrong, and to hear their parents say, I forgive you, I freely forgive you, and an embrace. It removes the shame and the guilt, and it restores a relationship. When is the last time you confessed something to your spouse? And don't use weenie words like I apologize. That's what I call weenie words. I apologize. No, the thing about confession and forgiveness is you hand the other person the power over this moment. You say, will you forgive me? That hands them the power in the conversation to say no or to say yes. So you see this all the time. Guys come out, after doing stupid stuff, they come out and give these press conferences, and, I misstepped, I misjudged, I apologize. How about somebody coming out and saying, I sinned. Here's how I sinned. That's important, because if you say how you sinned, then the other person knows that you really get it, right? That you understand, and that gives me hope that you'll remember it next time and not do it again. Will you forgive me? And I would guess that out of all the people in this room, 100% of us have something that we need to ask forgiveness for. Something that we kind of just, with weenie words, kind of swept away and just moved on, not resolving the problem right there. When we forgive and when we confess, it creates this confessional relationship that's much more honest. The more you confess and the more people forgive, you start to experience grace. What is grace? Well, we got all kinds of theological definitions, but grace to me is to be fully known and to be fully loved at the same time. There's something, this actually has a momentum to it. You do this awkward thing, your wife, your husband says, sweetheart, I forgive you. And then you do it again and again over the next few years, months, whatever, and you find that confession, that honesty, that openness becomes easier over time as long as this relationship is being developed. This is called Christ-likeness. This is called sanctification. We're growing in this. But if you are not a safe person, you know what I mean by that? If you're not the person who's willing to listen, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the great skill of communication is listening. If you're not the person who's willing to stop thinking in your mind how you're going to respond while they're talking, if you're not a person who has the body language of, I'm really glad you came, and what's most important to me is that you and I are reconciled, not that I get to win this battle. If you're a person who is hard to talk to, if I know that coming to you is just going to be one more battering of my personality, why would I come? Why would I come? Our Savior leaped to embrace us. In fact, I can remember moments in my life where I started a confession, and before I even got through the first sentence of the confession, like the father waiting at the gate for the prodigal, he starts this, he's planned this speech for months, He's like, Father, please, and I've done this, and And he doesn't even let it get out of his mouth before he's like, come here, I've missed you. That makes more sense to us as a father to a son than it does a wife and a husband, because that just feels different. But you are the primary purveyor of grace in your spouse's life. More than the pastor, more than the church, because you come here 2 hours a week or whatever. But you're the primary person who gives grace. And if you're a gracious person, then people will come to you and they will feel safe. So to give ourselves the word regular and lifestyle, those two words are really good, not just in the worst of times, but catching yourself in small moments. I remember years ago getting in the car, and you guys know I love humor, and I often use humor, and humor is the thing I learned in my childhood kept me safe in a hostile environment. I could diffuse adults screaming at one another, I could diffuse it by just cracking a joke. And everybody starts laughing, and I kind of slip out, you know. And so I just got married at 19 to this wonderful girl, and I would crack jokes about her. And I didn't think anything of it, but I had no idea what I was doing to her. And so finally, in this great moment of courage, she gets in the car one night and she turns to me and she says, "Do you have any idea what that does to me?" And immediately I felt the conviction of the Holy Spirit. Now she got in the car, "You jerk. Why are you such a jerk? Why can't you be like Martha's husband? He doesn't make fun of her." And see, Clark, there you go. Come back to church after being sick and you're the model guy. That's right there. If she'd started down that path, where would that have gone? A woman came to me years ago and she said, "I caught my husband looking at pornography at 2 a.m. And I lost it. I threw my shoe at him. I screamed and hollered at him. I said some things I shouldn't have said. I'm sorry, Pastor, I said those things." And I kicked him out of the house. I said, "Well, next time you catch him, do this. Stand behind him and weep. Just cry. Just let him know what this is doing to your heart." Because trust me, a guy, you throw a shoe at him, it's on. We need to know, and we need to respond to each other in ways that allow us to enter into this conversation without it being a war. So confession and forgiveness is part of that. Let's just look at the second one here, and then we'll come back next week. We will make growth and change our daily agenda. And just to be clear, that's my growth, not your growth, right? Yeah.
I'll tell Robin when she,
Yeah.
Robin said we're supposed to change.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I get quoted all the time, stuff that I say. And I say, it's not exactly what I said. My growth. And not just in marriage, but if we really are committed to the agenda of Christ-likeness in our life, if we really are committed to daily, have our face, coram Dei, to the face of God, to look in His Scriptures, to delight in Him. The thing that changes us is not exhortation. It's not even discipline or punishment. That doesn't change us. What changes us is glory. You look back on the most glorious moments of your life, the things that you saw where you went, whoa. Maybe it's the Grand Canyon. Maybe it's holding your baby that just 15 minutes ago was born. Whatever it is, There's something about that moment, you're never the same. And that's what it means for us to live coram Dei, to the face of God, to behold His glory regularly. Not just to learn the Bible because it's a manual on how to live and how God's going to do everything good for us if we just do these things. That's not the message of the Bible. The message of the Bible is about the glory of God and the beauty of Christ. And when we live that way, everything else, as important as it is not nearly as important as it used to be, right? The fact that my wife may say something that hurts my feelings, it still hurts my feelings, but it's not as big as it used to be because I have something much greater in my life. So making growth and change our daily agenda. Years ago, one of the elders at Christian Family Chapel taught this in a marriage class, and you've seen it. It's very simple, almost simplistic. He drew a triangle. He put me, my wife, and God, and he taught us how, as each of us moves closer and closer to God, we become closer and closer to each other. Now that may be simplistic, but boy, aren't there moments in our lives where we need simple? When things are so complex, we're going, I am clueless what to do here. Stay on the path of not just following Jesus, not just obeying Jesus, but loving and delighting in Jesus. Letting Him be the pursuit of my life. And guys, this is how we get in trouble. I'm talking guys now, men. A woman is not to be the pursuit of a man. A woman is someone that he invites into the pursuit of God. When we came into this world connected by an umbilical cord to a woman, and if we're not careful, we take that umbilical cord and we walk through life and we see a woman and we go, and the next 40 years are us sucking this woman dry of all the emotional support and everything else we can get out of her. And women hate that about us. They hate our weakness. They hate our passivity. They hate carrying us emotionally and spiritually, sometimes financially. There's something about a man who doesn't need you. A man who doesn't need you, but who wants you. That's a lot different proposition than a guy who's just running around looking for a place he can plug his umbilical cord into. And so we have a lot of growing up to do as men. And we teach our daughters, don't we? Be careful. Watch out for men who need you, who are needy men. Look for a strong man. So we got a few minutes left. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. First of all, questions about anything I've said so far. Yes, David.
Question for you, Pastor Tim. Earlier you mentioned a disciplinary situation at home, and it involves spanking. And I'm thinking about the young dads in this room right now with kids at home.
Yes.
And the spanking, and from my experience of working with other couples in ministry, when it comes to discipline, sometimes the guy can over-discipline, and the wife does not appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows that he has, biologically more testosterone, he's stronger. Ephesians 5, submit to your husband. She's supposed to be submitting, but she's seeing her children being treated, she thinks, crossing the line.
Yes. And it happens a lot.
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
And the wife feels, and that's why I prayed for women in my prayer, because they just feel so helpless. And they see their child potentially incurring, lifelong psychological damage that could happen or could not by God's grace. But do you think that the husband and wife should agree equally on the kind and extent of discipline at home?
Yes.
So if the guy can't say, I know what I'm talking about, I'm the guy here, but both husband and wife have to agree.
I can think of one moment.
And then I want you to say just general tips on younger dads and younger wives on discipline.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, let's just talk about spanking for a moment. In the state of Florida, if you leave a mark on a child, you can be in really big trouble. Now, the way the laws are written, and David can speak to this much better than me because he's a family law guy, the laws are sort of amorphous enough that you're kind of at the mercy of the judge you get and how that judge views this. If you have a judge or a DCF person who takes this strictly, you can have your child taken from you if they go to school and they show up. And by the way, as a pastor, I'm required, if I see marks on a child, 1-800-96-ABUSE, I'm supposed to call and I'm supposed to report it. 3 times I've had to do that in a church situation. And God graciously intervened, and I always call David Andrews and say, hey, I got this situation, what do I do? So we did spank our children, but as I mentioned, we used 2 instruments. One was a 1/4-inch dowel, and we had them above all the rooms, so the kids would go and try to get the chair and try to hide them and that sort of thing. But it was enough to sting, but not enough to leave a mark very long, and certainly not enough to break skin or to break a bone. If you hit too hard, the stick itself broke. And so we wanted, children live under a pain-pleasure ethic up to a certain age. And so you can talk to him all you want, and you can think, well, my kid's gifted, and he's 3 years old, and so I can talk to him like an adult. He's not getting it, and he's not wired to get it. Children live under this what's pleasurable, what's painful. And we often teach them discipline and keeping rules before they're old enough to understand them. If you try to reason with your child at a young age, they're not going to get it. And one of the struggles of having gifted children is that they talk to you like they're adults, right? And a lot of kids are gifted nowadays. They're a lot healthier than we were when we were coming up. Their protein is better. Their brains are wired by technology. They're very, very smart people who aren't very wise. And so there has to be, the other thing I would say is there has to be rules. We have to agree. And in fact, there were several moments in the rearing of our children where we would say to our kids, you wait right there. Mom and I are going to go to the bedroom and we're going to figure out what to do. We're not going to fight this out in front of them. We're going to go and we'll come out when we're ready. Well, they learned that was a scary moment, right? Because always you want to get mom and dad kind of against each other, So and I was the weaker disciplinarian. Surprise, surprise, right? Because I am this softy guy. And my wife had to bear a lot of the burden of the, strict is not the word, but the strength of disciplining. But to answer your core question, yes, of course, we should. And that's healthy for the child. Well, I'm going to go ask mom. Okay, fine, you're wasting conversation because mom and I have already agreed on this. It's a terrible thing to do to a dad to say, when your dad gets home, so he's walking in the door, he's been beat up by the world, the first thing he's confronted with is, couldn't you have disciplined them? The other thing we did is we make clear the rules. And Allison's a genius about this because as a school teacher, she often did these behavior modification charts and all this. And to say to your children, these are our rules too. These are not our rules, these are God's rules. And we all live according to these rules. And so the same thing I expect of you, I expect of myself. And therefore I have to model, right? If I expect my child to sit at the table a certain way, I have to do that. And so we're modeling. As one professor I had said, more is caught than is taught. The children watch us, they're incredibly intuitive. They know where the vacuums are, the leadership vacuums are, and they are geniuses at finding themselves in the middle of all of that. So making the rules clear, and by the way, don't pick your kids to death. Imagine if God required of us to obey Him every single time without grace. the way we expect our kids to. If a 4-year-old is not listening the first time, he's just a 4-year-old. There's a difference between childishness and defiance. And it goes back to Proverbs 22:6, which was one of the most important verses for me. Most Bibles say it this way: train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. But the Hebrew text doesn't say that, and for the life of me, I don't know why they don't translate it correctly. Usually they put a little note in there, and you go down to the tiny print at the bottom. It says, train up a child according to his way, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Why? Because you brought Christ into the way this child is wired. So we had 3 children, and every once in a while I'd look at them and go, did all 3 of these come out of the same womb? I mean, they're so different in so many different ways. So we had to learn. So Benjamin, our middle child, I almost never spanked that child. I just had to look at him with a look on my face, and he would start crying. He's that tender. James, well, that's another story, but he was a very compliant child in a lot of ways, and our discipline of him was more about he really, because he's high D in the disc, okay, he really believed he was right about stuff, and he's very articulate. Many of you have met him, and so he's 12 years old and can give you just as good an argument. In fact, one time I was disciplining him, and he gave me an argument back, and I stopped and I said, you know what? That was so good. I'm going to let you off the hook. And then Mary was totally different. She was kind of scattered and just, all over the place and so forth.
Like you?
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Scattered and all over the place? Yeah, I mean that. Anyway, you get the point. So knowing your child, learning your child, not just disciplining your child in a cookie cutter way, but this child is different from this child. And it's not showing partiality, by the way. If the rules are the same for everybody, then it's not partiality. If the rules are different, if you have a favorite child and that child gets off, that's partiality. Done.
And the other thing is just, realize when you should do it. I mean, there's certain things you're working with the kids a lot on, and you got to be very careful if they're around their friends and it's a public setting or
yeah, don't humiliate them. Yeah.
It's not, and not that you're humiliating, but it comes across to them to a certain extent. It kind of robs their spirit a little bit.
Sure.
Just there's after that event's over, maybe talk about some of these issues. And I'm not saying I do it great.
But Don, you're
coming home. You're not, as a guy, you don't know what's all been going on at the house the whole day. You gotta.
The other piece, though, Don, that you do so well, and you really do, is you are involved with your children. And so when you're working in the yard or you're fishing or you're going to the store or whatever, you're taking your kids along, and they're, particularly the boys, they're learning what it's like to be this man who takes care of his family and so forth. That's the other piece. There's a sense of injustice that a child feels. He may not understand what justice is, but he intuits, I never see you, and suddenly now you're in my life telling me what to do. And so to be deeply involved with them, to love them, to compliment and encourage the good side, so that when you say no, no actually means something. If you're constantly saying no, it's just another weenie word. It's word inflation. Jim.
2 thoughts also. When it comes to discipline, sometimes we become personally involved. So I encourage those that have children, talk about tag teaming. There are times where you have to step away, and then your partner steps in when it comes to discipline, because you can be in the wrong emotional state of mind.
Yeah, and that goes back to that issue of trust and really committing to your own personal growth. If your spouse does not have veto power in some areas of your life, you're not living by trust. there are certain areas of my life where Allison and we're both the same way back and forth, where she can call time out. She can see it in me. And I was an angry father of young children. I grew up in an angry house. Nobody ever taught me how to parent kids. I just, God said it, I believe it, that kind of thing. And I had to teach myself, and I disciplined my children in anger a lot when they were little. And there was a moment when my 5-year-old daughter was standing in the hallway and I was fussing at her, a 6'1", 200 and something pound guy, a professional speaker with a voice like this, was talking to a 5-year-old about what was going on in this moment. And God, for some reason, gave her the grace, the courage to say, she started crying, she said, Daddy, Daddy, when you talk like that, it scares me. And the Holy Spirit just struck me in that moment. Now, the easy thing is, you want to be scared? I'll give you something to be scared about. I mean, to be that guy. But giving your spouse a chance to say, let me deal with this. Okay, number 2, Jim.
So this is more for the men in regarding to our children. Our children, they do a lot of things in a lot of ways. And, we do extend grace from time to time. But I made sure that all 3 of my boys, they should never disrespect their mother.
Yes.
And I told them, because she is my wife.
Mm-hmm.
You can get away a lot of things, but you will not get away with that. And certainly, my wife swelled up with honor.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, honoring one another. But the thing is, if we teach honor, if we teach it in advance, it's less likely to happen. When it happens, then you have an example of that. And they watch you because you honor her. And, I would say the greatest thing you can do for your children, other than give them Jesus Christ, is to be happy in your marriage, to be respectful of each other. They're watching this. Yes, Chris.
Just something to think about. The whole subject of discipline within the family. There's a lot more to do than just peace in the family. It has great societal ramifications behind it.
Yeah.
Everybody else suffers for a child who's not been taught discipline and has not been disciplined
Yes.
in their life. And so it needs to take place in the family, but you also have to remember that I'm raising a child up in the way of the Lord, and that has a great consequence in the society, and you can see it in our society.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That there's this lack of discipline.
There's the word I use is lawlessness. There's a lawlessness in even the smallest rules. Teach your child when the police officer says, stand up, you stand up. But the flip side of that is, son, I want you to understand that if he's wrong, I'm going to come to your defense and we're going to go to court and we're going to solve this. So you don't have to win that battle. I will be there for you. What you talked about today, David, is so critical for us to learn that, our nation was not founded on submission to authority. In fact, rebelliousness against the king was at the core of who we are. And what we're seeing is that working out over the last 240 years now down to I don't have to do anything because I just don't want to. I can do whatever I want. That's a formula for total disaster. All right, let's pick this up next week. We are over time, and we'll finish out this next week. That'll be the last week. And by the way, after next Sunday, Valentine's Day comes, and so be thinking about carving out time. Where are you, Paul? Where with the information? Yeah. So see these guys back here because they've worked with Family Life Ministry forevermore. and they have some literature for you, some information about family life ministry. Tim and Eunice just recently went through an experience with another ministry that was really helpful in their marriage. So at some point they can share things with you. Please carve out some time for Valentine's Day. And guys, that's us. We're the carvers. Okay, make it happen. All right, love you guys.